This is
Right.
Cora, like the legend.
Oh, Cora's so cute.
She's a
Mhm.
Mhm. What is she?
she's a Shiba Inu.
Shiba Inu. I love them the most. They're so awesome.
She's
That's
like,
awesome.
why did you wake me up?
Okay, we are in 5 o'clock UK time, which means it is time to start this panel. So if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and introduce this thing. And I also need to start the live stream so people can join us in the Facebook group. And Steve, if you are still here, I would appreciate if you could, I don't know, maybe repost it into the main conference group as well. It's really lovely to have all of you here, and lovely to have some people joining us live. My name is Julie S. I should probably rename myself. My name is Julie S. and I'm a teen teacher of English and LGBTQ activist from Moscow, Russia. And I also happen to be the channel manager for trauma and social change at the Embodiment Conference. And it is my delight to be moderating this discussion today. This is the second installment of our embodiment and inclusion and accessibility panel. And today we have 4 wonderful people with us today, which I will introduce in just a moment. With us today is Jamie Zimron, somatic psychotherapist and body worker, Aikido sensei, LPGA golf pro, corporate speaker, mind body fitness and stress trainer, LGBTQ and Middle East peace activist. Wow. Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
Also Matthew Samford, who is an author, public speaker, and founder of Mind Body Solutions, which is a non-profit organization transforming trauma, loss, and disability into hope and potential. Welcome, Matthew.
It's an honor.
Also with us is Sheena Sood, yogini, holistic healer, writer, educator, and activist, and a scholar of South Asian descent. Welcome, Sheena. And William Flay, founder of MNPC, that aims to bring awareness through mindfulness-based interventions for resilience, self-care, and cross-cultural dialogue. Welcome to all of you. We are going to have just under an hour for this conversation. So, and as this is an event, you know, in the run-up to the Embodiment Conference, this, as Manal said in the morning panel today, at these panel discussions, what we really want to do is to kind of create the kind of future we want to see and to model a kind of dialogue that we want to make possible. At the conference, we would like to bring in a variety of perspectives on topics that are really relevant, that really matter to us. And that's why, we're bringing in people for 3 panel discussions today. One happened this morning, one's happening now, and there's one more happening a bit later today. And I would like to propose a very simple format. So if you don't mind, at first, I'd like to ask you all the same question and give each of you 5 minutes to speak to that. So don't be upset if I tell you that your 5 minutes are up. We will have an opportunity to continue this conversation. And if the people watching us live have any questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we can come to these questions as we go along. So the first question I would like to ask all of you is a pretty straightforward one. How do you bring the body into the work that you do? So I would like to know more about the things that you do and how and what kind of role embodiment plays in that. And Jamie, may I start with you?
Okay, thank you. Well, I think I'm just going to go back almost to childhood, if that's okay, and then we'll get to the work. And that is that, you know, when I was a kid, I was what we would call a tomboy. Yeah, I was very athletic. the same time, I was also very heady, actually. I was like doing sort of advanced math in kindergarten, multiplying and dividing. And this is years ago before we had all these, great education and precocious kids. And so I kind of had the mind body thing going on, as a kid. And I started playing golf when I was 7 years old. And I became a kind of a golf star by the time I was 9 or 10. Again, before there was everything that there is these days for kids and for juniors. So, later on when I was around 21 is when I started to practice Aikido. And as I started to train in this martial art, which is a very mind-body martial art, it suddenly became clear to me that, oh, that's what I've been doing. We didn't have words for it. Oh, this is somatics, or this is mind, or this is holistic, or, why I sort of understood a good golf swing without any training, because a good golf swing is centered and it's got balance and it's got energy flow and it's not this sort of brute force kind of power. And you have to have a lot of inner awareness in what you're doing to carry into the outer act of hitting a golf ball. Well, through Aikido is when I really started to become aware of the body and also the terms or the concepts for it that we would call now holistic or somatic. And about 2 months into training in Aikido, which I've now been training and teaching for like 45 years, you can do the math. But we started to massage each other and work on each other because, of course, we got sore as we were training. And people said, well, you've got good hands and you ought to train as a massage therapist. So I started taking some massage courses. And some people may have heard of Richard Strozzi Heckler, Wendy Palmer. There's some names in this field. They'll be speaking at the Embodiment Conference. Well, they were part of a school early on in the 70s, 80s called the Lomi School, which incorporated psychology and Gestalt psychology, Reichian therapy, breath work, along with movement, conscious movement. So there was sort of yoga-based and actual Aikido training, as well as meditation from their Indian masters. It was an incredible marriage of all that. And again, this is when the kind of somatic psychology movement was getting going. And so that was really how I got into it. And as I started to do work with people and privately, after I was trained as a body worker, I started to notice that all the psychology came forward, meaning all of our history, all of our emotions. And it was like, oh, I was young and I needed to understand that. So then I went and I got my master's degree in clinical psychology. And I also opened my own Aikido school. It was a women's Aikido school, first ever in San Francisco. So that's sort of the background of where everything has come from. And working as a psychotherapist for many years in private practice, it was so clear to me that talk therapy alone didn't kind of get to what we need to get to, and that there's so much wisdom in the body. I was also fortunate back in the 80s to train with Peter Levine and doing trauma work, and just had so many profound experiences. There's a couple things I want to mention around that, and that is that I learned from him way back when. One was he would say, there was a time before. There was a time before the incident, the accident, the trauma happened. And there is also this timelessness before, this forever, as we call it, the forever uninjured, uninjurable part of us inside of us. And how could we access that? How can we get to there and feel that sense of closeness to ourselves, that sense of empowerment and that ability to heal? And there was also, he would juxtapose the trauma or the negative, bad experiences that we've had and to, well, what's the image and the experiences of that? And we would really feel it, not talk about it. But, we're laying down, we're breathing, we're paying close attention to our somatic sensations. And then what's the opposite image? Have an opposite image. And then that would evolve into a real healing experience, along with what we call eidetic imagery. And eidetic imagery is not just kind of having a visualization, but eidetic, it just means like the real feeling, the real sensations, the lived experience. So when we're working therapeutically with the images, it's like to really feel them as alive, happening things in the body, and bringing past and into the now, so we can heal it. It's kind of never too late in a sense to have a good childhood. But so that I hope that helps somewhat to bring that through. I'm gay, and I'm lesbian. I'm also Jewish, and I've been very aware of issues of privilege. I would say actually since back then too, I had an opportunity when I was a student at Stanford to take a course with Angela Davis, which was phenomenal. And like back in the 70s to start thinking about privileges. And so, you know, I realized that we talk about kind of white body privilege or hetero body privilege or male body privilege and the class privilege. Those are all intersectional. And in a sense, you know, I've certainly experienced my share of trauma and worked with so many women and LGBTQ people, also people in war zones, because I'm a dual citizen in Israel and have worked a lot with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and to see what war and trauma and living in constant fear and what that is in the nervous system and body image. And gay people have an interesting experience just because we're, in a sense, we can be invisible, which you can't when you have
there's a lot
color.
of questions I have there.
I just want to raise those things at this point. But just in, you know, in terms of background is really where all this has come from. And, you know, the embodiment part is just made all the difference, I would say, in terms of, first of all, a rich life, but a rich life in terms of interacting with people, working with people, and working on the healing side of things.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Thanks so much. Matthew, what about you? What is embodiment in your work? How do you bring the body into that?
For me, it's been foundational. Just to quickly tell you, I was injured when I was 13 and broke my back. So I get around in a wheelchair. I'm wheeling around right now. And so I've lived a mind-body problem since I was 13. I'm 54 now. So if you think about what a mind-body problem is that your awareness or consciousness can't access your whole body and then also bring it out into the world, right? So, you know, part of the mind-body problem is also that human beings have a knowledge that they can't bring into action. So if you think about the mind-body problem on a couple different levels, right? And there's being able to bring awareness to your whole body and then bring that awareness out into the world, right? So I've been practicing yoga since I was 25, and so that's 29 years. And so I've been on a quest. I started yoga because I really missed my body. I basically was led by the rehabilitation model and the medical model to overcome my body, to make my upper body really strong and drag my paralyzed body through life. And so at 25, I started on an exploration of what's possible. What is it to be embodied despite neurological deficit, despite a spinal sever cord? And it turns out that yoga, I'm a yoga teacher, yoga is quite a way to create presence in the body without muscular action. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing it. So I've been exploring that for a long time. And in terms of how embodiment, and I'm also trained as an analytic philosopher, so I'm a recovering analytic philosopher. So I'm pretty in my head too, right? And so I've been seeking how to live through my entire body and passing it on to others. And being a yoga teacher of people of all abilities, it's not just that I'm trying to, for social justice reasons, to a disenfranchised or population. It's that honestly, it's everyone's birthright to live in their whole body. And that there are modalities that allow you to do that regardless of having an altered mind-body relationship. And for me, I think there are, our culture in particular, at least here in the United States, I think I wrote Waking, the book I wrote, Waking, a memoir of trauma and transcendence, because I started to think that the mind-body problem I lived in my body was also manifested by our culture as we started to accelerate into our lives and lost connection to our bodies, right? And I think that we're more and more, our culture is kind of a walking head. That's why you're seeing like more stress, more anxiety, more a whole bunch of other things occur because we're not being embodied. So I believe that there are essential learning that needs to travel from body to mind, including things like, I train a lot of healthcare professionals and caregivers, and that they need to, I think, like let truths come from body to mind, that like there's grounding is a crucial sensation to human beings. I think we all need to study the sensation of support. If you wait for the external world to be the one that's supporting you, you're going to be in trouble. That's really true in healthcare, the way that structurally is now, that we have to get better at conjuring the sensation of support. I think I like what William's doing with forgiveness, like conjuring the sensation of gratitude without being grateful for something, or forgiveness is what William's doing, right? But like those are three-dimensional states. Trust is a three-dimensional state, that we have to learn to have these states because we know that they're good, and that we need to bring those into the world instead of waiting for the world to actually create the conditions for us to have it. So to me, embodiment is not only helping someone realize other possibilities of environment, of embodiment, right, as being essential to a waking consciousness, but also that there are things that we need to bring into the world, and they need to come through our bodies. We can always and will always argue about beliefs. Beliefs will always lead to violence, right? That we need to find a different way to embody consciousness that doesn't require, that shows commonality between bodies more than it shows commonality between beliefs. And so to me, embodiment is a transformation of human consciousness. It's what we need to do. We need to ground. We need to start finding, and that's the only way to compassion and to nonviolence. And all these things, I think, we need a course correction, which is to become embodied and awake. So.
Thank you so much, Matthew, for this perspective. It's quite inspiring, and I see there is a comment in the chat, something to be aware of for all of us. It's really easy to get carried away and start speaking quite quickly. However, there are quite a few people tuning in for whom English is not their first language. So let's try and
I'm a rapid speaker.
With that. Yeah. So thank you so much. Dr. Sheena.
Hi, greetings everyone. Greetings to those I can't see, but I'm in the space with you and grateful to be here. Thank you for your perspectives, Jamie and Matthew. So I live here in Philadelphia, and I think that Matthew pointed out, right, like that embodiment is about grounding. And for me, my living in Philadelphia and learning about the land and my connection to it and my connection to my ancestry has been part of how I think about embodiment, right? So when I think about my ancestors, I think about histories of colonization that really created the circumstances to where trauma lives in my ancestors' bodies because of the experience of colonization and partition, and how I've inherited stories and understandings of healing modalities such as yoga and such as chanting and Sanskrit through my grandmother, who taught me Sanskrit mantras as a healing modality to be able to affirm myself, but also learning that Sanskrit mantras have been learned or have been used as weapons historically within the subcontinent of South Asia, right? So lower caste communities were not allowed to learn these healing mantras and chants within South Asia, because they would be like, brutalized for trying to chant and learn Sanskrit, right? And so part of my embodiment practice is to really sit with the complexity of how healing modalities have been used across time, and to not necessarily always have answers about how it is that healing can be used in these like complex ways, but to really sit with that discomfort, right? And grounding myself in Philly has meant, okay, how can I use my yoga practice and purpose it towards collective liberation, especially for the bodies that carry the most amount of trauma. So within Philadelphia, it's a city that carries a lot of state-sanctioned trauma because of the influence. Of course, right now we're witnessing police brutality in this moment, in the way in which the respect for Black life within America and across the globe is absent, right, to say the least. And so part of my practice has been, how can I teach people to be able to be their own healers. And within Philly in 1985 and in 1979, the state sanctioned really abhorrent cases of violence where they bombed their own citizens. What's known as the move bombing, where they bombed an entire house and murdered 11 people, children and family members. And so part of my practice has been to teach yoga for liberation. So every year we do a 5K to recognize the people who are political prisoners within Philadelphia. And one of the people who survived that bombing, Ramona Africa, recently has been recovering from cancer. And so going to her house and teaching her chair yoga as a practice of healing, right? And so I think part of my embodiment practice is really just how can I merge my writing, my practice, my scholarship to talk about how yoga is used in these complicated ways. I write on how Narendra Modi, the prime minister, uses yoga as a weapon, and how reclaiming yoga just through these like racial identity markers is not necessarily the solution. And even how within, Jamie pointed out Israel, I talk about how Israeli soldiers are using yoga and how that is an example of the weaponization of yoga, where soldiers are using it to spiritually bypass actually reckoning with the violence that they are implanting on Palestinians who aren't allowed to enter Israel, or what I call occupied Palestine. And so I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Sheena. All right, and William.
Hello, everyone, and from all around the world, and it's so nice to be here with all of these great speakers. So I'd like to invite everyone just to take a moment to pause, to ground themselves, to collect themselves, just to take a deep breath and just sense how they're feeling, sense the space around them, their body on the chair, the grounding. So yeah, it's a really interesting question. What is grounding in embodiment work? And in my work as a mindfulness teacher and as a psychotherapist, we work with quite a lot of the disembodiment, with disassociation, and with trapped trauma, historical trauma. But as people of color, LGBT communities, and marginalized communities, we see more and more that we not only carry our own stuff, but that we carry generations and generations of images, of narratives, of brokenness, but also resilience and beauty and traditions, and as Sheena was saying, mantras and all these beautiful things that really live inside us. And I was thinking recently something that a friend of mine said when she held her grandmother's hand. And she said, my grandmother, as I held her hand, I realized when she held her grandmother's hand, she was holding the hand of a slave. So that's not so long in the past. So sometimes we're thinking we're doing individual work, healing ourselves, or many times that we're reacting to something that is part of our own trauma, but actually it isn't. There's so many examples that I can give here of areas in our lives which are blind spots that we haven't even begun to become embodied, because we have been conditioned to do the opposite. So part of my rationale is to turn to nature, to turn to trees as my refuge, really. I think you can see the trees actually speaking to me in the background as we speak. That was I didn't position myself deliberately here, but yeah, so I think we need to learn how to look after ourselves as social justice workers and all the work that we do, to realize what we're carrying, to realize what we're able to give, to realize where people are at with their disembodiment. And I think there's so much of the disembodiment that we need to really cover before we're embodied, because I'm not so sure how prepared people are yet. So really preparing people, and I think forgiveness is a big part of that, because how can we learn to the compassion and the self-care without really loosening all the other things that come with trauma? So yeah, for me, it's the simple practices. Sometimes it's cooking for someone you love, like cookies or something simple like that, which is, to me, that's embodiment. Sitting with someone you really care about and really feeling that connection and that love from that person, that is like, whoa, real embodiment. But yeah, the simplicity, the nature, I'm really getting into that. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for all of your perspectives. You're all very different, and I love it. You are welcome to ask each other questions. Also, if anyone watching would like to put a question in the chat, that would be lovely as well. Is there anything you would like to ask each other this very moment? I do have a question myself, so, but do let me know if you've got any.
Either you ask no questions or like a zillion. So it's kind of hard to just say, hey, got one question? You know, it's like, well, yeah, I've got a whole bunch of questions, right? So why don't you ask the question, and then as we answer, maybe we'll be able to cut in on each other.
All right.
Again,
so,
yeah.
Then my question is, so there has been some discussion among participants about how, you know, very often when we organize events, when we do our practices as facilitators, we attract a certain demographic of people, and sometimes that's about niching, but also it's about how welcome people feel in a space. And is there anything, are there any pointers you could give from your own practice, from your own experience? What can we as facilitators do in order to create a more inclusive environment, a more welcoming environment in whatever work that we're doing?
So we'll create a more welcoming environment, but I do want to go back and just say, now besides the shock of asking a question, more I have a comment about a couple of things I heard.
Yeah. Right,
from the earlier panelists. And one is like, I'm still like being rocked on the inside that in certain caste systems, you're denied access to mantras. Okay, like that one I'm just going to take away, right? That to me is an unbelievable invasion, right? Like I can't even imagine trying to stop someone from an internal practice like that. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, it's not like a big surprise, right? And the other thing I was thinking about when William was talking was that I think that human consciousness gets more subtle and aware as we process the passing of time. So I think that not only is there generational trauma that's really important to process, but we will become better human beings as we actually allow that something has happened, did happen. There's been violence through our entire history. And that, instead of being just something to feel bad about, we have to take it in first. So like, Lynn, I liked what you said about that we got to get even below certain things to let in before we start trying to change everything. Because we have to just acknowledge something unbelievable has happened, right? Like human beings have been doing things for a long time to each other that are just incredibly painful, right? And so I think, how do I make something welcoming? Very quickly, I think that you have to learn embodied respect, right? Like that's a sensation that needs to like learn how to be literally exuding out of you, and not just through your head, not just through your words, like through your nervous system, through your spine. I mean, just like watching how William sits, right? I can feel that he's very located in his own body, in his own space, but gracefully with the space outside of them. I'm sure, Jamie, like that's how you move well in Aikido. You actually aren't colliding with the space around you. You're actually being open to it and receiving back and forth. So I think a whole bunch of body practices teach us how to make a space welcoming. That I'm sure everyone's got a whole bunch of insights on it.
I'll chime in. You know, in Aikido, we begin with a bow. So we in class, and we pair up. And so we bow, and there's just an equality in terms of the welcoming. There's an absolute equality that we greet each other with, or that sense of namaste, shall we say. And, you know, everyone's been talking about this. I mean, we need to get to this sense of our basic humanity, our commonality. And so in Aikido, we started an initiative. It's called Training Across Borders. And it was to begin to bring Israelis and Palestinians together, and people in conflict, Arabs and Jews. We had Serbs and Bosnians, different people, Greeks and Turks who've been in, you know, wars. We had to go to Cyprus, to the UN buffer zone, in order to even physically get together. So, you know, the physicality of being able to get together, we are so divided. You know, here in America, it doesn't matter where. I mean, communities are divided by economics, by race, and we can't even physically get together. And I think that's so important that we create those spaces. We have to take initiative to do that. And, you know, basically, to me, the body, I always say the body's had a bad rap and a bad rep. So the Judeo-Christian ethic is that, like, you know, this is bad and dirty and sin and all that. So, you know, we're like separated from our bodies. And even in the East, we have kind of the sense that the master is maybe, poor or a beggar, or, you know, getting alms or something like this, that, you know, we don't have an image really of a blended body, mind, spirit that is truly equal in that regard. And something I wanted to say, you know, I've had the experience of walking through checkpoints as a Jewish and Israeli person with Palestinians, going through checkpoints and kind of being in, it's like being in cages, you know, really to go through the checkpoints. And it's terrifying, it's demeaning, it's humiliating, it's divisive, it's really terrifying, I must say. And the combination of terror and humiliation, and you feel it, it's just extraordinary. And, you know, you can't get from one side to the other. You have to drive around. So many things I could go on about. And I think about, we use words like status, say, for immigrants and aliens, and not having a country, not having status physically, and how that comes into your psyche, how that comes into your nervous system, how that comes into your self-image, your ability to operate in the world. I mean, there's so many dimensions we can go into, but it's also physical. And I think that part of the dominant culture cutting off only in our heads, and then having our heads stratify people and make them superior and inferior, is all part of the where we've been violent to each other and not been in our common humanity. And it's so important that we make big shifts in our minds and our bodies, in a sense of that bow, that commonality, that namaste, because we really are all the same, all one. There is no difference. But, you know, all the isms really begin in the body, you know, the color of your skin, your sexuality, your gender, your nationality, all these things. And then we start to oppress and become violent to each other, and then we're separated. So, I mean, it really is a huge subject, but it's so important that we start to really address these things.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. And I think one thing that I'm still like contemplating in my heart and in my mind and my body is really, I shared the information about the mantras because I think it's not very common knowledge, right? We often romanticize these mantras as pure, as peaceful. And I think that's part of the way in which dominant culture teaches us to glorify a pre-colonial past or to glorify the past. And it often makes me think in my heart, right? Who have these healing philosophies worked for? And that's not to say I don't believe there's like a universal way in which nature is inherently about healing our bodies, our minds, our spirits, and our wholes to feel interconnected. And I feel as if, based on some of my historical research, that some of these philosophies haven't, from at least thousands of years ago, they've been working to purposely keep us segregated or divided and to perpetuate oppression. And so it makes me wonder, right, when it comes to sharing those philosophies, have they actually been threaded or woven through generations of people who have embodied trauma and then said, and I think here I'm talking about really horrific traumas of state-sanctioned violence, right, and militarism, and have they been the ones that have created their embodied practice? Because really, it can't be about, me as an upper caste person teaching this practice to someone and saying, hey, use this so that you can be healing, you can heal yourself and be free. In some ways, there's got to be influence from the grassroots or influence from the bottom up to be able to say, like, this is what's going to work for me and this is what's not. And for people to be in a place of power, to be able to share what an embodied practice that is truly liberatory is going to look like for them. And so I don't know. I mean, I think I've seen beautiful ways in which those welcoming spaces have been created, right? Like BIPOC only yoga classes. BIPOC is an acronym that stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, or queer trans yoga spaces. And I think those are really great in a temporary way. They aren't going to ultimately get us to like full freedom. I've seen ways in which people, I know for me, I really try to take the philosophy and try to dig into how it can make us live in embodied ways and like more politicized ways. And I think not taking up space is a really important way in which, maybe if somebody invites me to do something for a particular community that's not my own, if I'm the only one, okay, I'll show up. But if I know of someone who maybe is more representative of that community, can I say, you know what, call this person. They might be the better, more authentic and representative of that population to be able to share this practice. But I do think there is a way in which we really have to reckon with how is it that who are these healing modalities really serving, and how can they better serve the purpose of collective liberation, not just, we live in a capitalist system, and the capitalist system thrives off of like people being sick, people being unwell, trauma being inflicted, right? Racism and capitalism go hand in hand. And I know I sound like a scholar when I say that, but like the violence that has impacted communities on the bottom is because we stole land, because we enslaved and chatteled Black people on this land. And so the system doesn't want those people to be free, liberated, enlightened, or well. And so it makes sense that we would adopt a practice like yoga, which I love dear to my heart, but it makes sense that it becomes commodified and capitalized and serves only able-bodied, rich, white communities. And that's something that I think we have to reckon with.
Thank you. William, anything to add on about welcoming spaces? Yeah, I know that this is the discussion that we're having right now and some questions that are coming up in the Q&A are a part of a huge discussion, which we can't possibly encompass in this hour that we have.
Yeah, so I suppose as people were speaking, I just was writing down a few points. And I thought the best way to really have people feel welcome is to offer them yourself, offer them your full attention. So how we are prepared, knowing our own blind spots, knowing our own traumas, and really being really fully prepared to receive them. So that does mean that as practitioners, we have to really be fully present with a lot of suffering. So welcoming all parts of them. I've been in many groups where I've had to sort of compartmentalize, either being a person of color or being an LGBT person. And so because the teacher wasn't really prepared or ready for that. So parts of myself really not being in that space. And there's a lot that can be said actually in silence, and how we hold ourselves and how we present ourselves. And part of my monastic training, we spend a lot of time in silence. And when you spend a lot of time in silence, you actually begin to realize you say much more with your body than you do with words. That words actually sometimes can be interpreted in so many ways, and you begin to actually pick up, like radar, how people with telepathy. There's a whole range of things that actually language constructs or not constructs, gets in the way of really picking up. So that can only be achieved really through silence and deep contemplation. I forgot the question. So yes, how do you feel welcome?
Yeah, that's what's beautiful. You answered it.
Did I answer it? So yeah, I mean, we inhabit these silent spaces, which we're living right now in a time where we want to learn. We're all on Zoom. We're chat. I haven't encountered a silent Zoom group yet. So it's interesting because I must be on Zoom like 8 hours, and I kind of want to switch off Zoom. I think that would be really embodying. Like just sitting in nature in the silence. That's the real mindfulness practice. So this is where we really, really, really process a lot of stuff in the silence. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and there's been a lot in what all of you said. And to kind of partly perhaps answer the question that came up in the chat, which again is huge. It's how do we bring the body into unlearning and healing from, say, the injustices of the world, like racism and colonialism and the consequences of all of that. And you've all said some very powerful things about the need for a shift, both in the mind and in our language, and also a shift in the body, in order to be able to be present with whoever we are working with, the communities that we are serving, and also allowing space for others. I thought that was really, really beautiful. And as we have 15 minutes to wrap this up, what about all the people who are listening in, so people who are perhaps participants? What might your invitation for them to be? Because we've been talking about these things like injustices of the world, which can be quite overwhelming. What is something that can help participants and people around the world, the people you work with, be more resilient, be able to face all of that's happening? I know it's a big ask.
I'm not even, what's the question again? I mean, like, it's kind of like how the body, I mean, like, obviously they're like hearing so many edges to that question. So it looks like Jamie's got a plan. She raised her hand.
Well, I'll get started anyways. Well, I think, one of the real difficulties of this time is that we aren't physically together the way we're used to being. I mean, everybody's just like thirsty, longing, hungry for contact, for touch, for hugs, for just expression, for doing, for interacting, I mean, it's one thing, you can go out for a walk by yourself, which is wonderful, but it's like, well, God, can't I just, go dance with my friends and things like that. So I think that it's so important that we do get outside and connect with nature. And if you can't hug a person, definitely like hugging trees for real. And centering, really coming into the body. And, Zoom is got its issues and we're apart, but there is connection. And if we allow ourselves to be in our hearts and to really be participatory in sessions. And, I saw comments kind of intellectual. Well, when we're doing yoga or when we're doing any kind of physical practices, we're doing Aikido online. It's not quite the same, but we're in our bodies. And I do corporate speaking, but I call them talk trainings. So I spend, half the time at least up, and we're working with our breath and our bodies and our legs and our grounding and our connection with our bodies and all. I wanted to just say a couple quick things, and I know we don't have that much time, but one is Aikido has got a philosophy of harmony, of blending. And we went to Russia in 1987 to 1991. I went quite a few times. It was the beginning of opening up. And at the time we were in the Cold War, and the Americans and the commies, and, we had all these stupid images of each other and fears. We got off the airplane, we were nervous. Very quickly, grabbing hands, actually touching, connecting, rolling around, making joining, blending movements, harmonious movements in our bodies and with another person is phenomenal. And to actually get circular and to roll and to breathe and to flow from that place of equal respect is an amazing embodied practice of what it is to join with, to be with another, and to have that actual feeling. So I think it's important that we do flow kinds of practices and work with that. The last thing I just wanted to say is, if you think about gay pride and pride marches, like we're not being able to be out there and march together, but anybody who's been to one or go online and look at one, it's just this like effusion of bodies, of color, of clothes, of dress, of dancing, of music, of expression. And I think our self-expression from a place that's connected, that has respect, that has joy, that has joy in being who we are, whatever that gender is, that sexuality is, that color is, that we need to really inhabit our bodies. And that's something we can do right now, is to take this time when we're not with other bodies in maybe more silence, more connection, is to really inhabit our own bodies, our own identities, and from a place of fullness, of wholeness. And the word peace in Hebrew means whole, and in Arabic, salam, shalom, is from the root word. It's the same root in both languages, right? Of wholeness.
Yeah, I've got some ideas, just like some things that I think are attributes of the body that are not fully appreciated. I think that your body, as it is always innocent, right? Things might have happened to you, but your body, as its manifestation, is innocent. It's the best home your mind will ever have, right? It will never leave you. It will always move all its energy towards life. It's not your mind, it's not your body that wavers, it's faithfulness. It's your mind, right? It's the organ of connection. Your mind is the organ of disconnection, right? That it is always present. And it is the best witness to the entirety of your life. Your mind is what wavers, not your body. And that was a huge healing moment for me, that after the accident I went through, and I learned to disassociate from my body to survive the traumatic violence of acute care in a hospital. And I started having flashbacks when I started yoga to all the things that happened to me as a 13-year-old boy, that it was my body that carried me to living. wasn't my will, it wasn't my endurance. It was nothing of the sort. What happened to me was overwhelming. And my body kept the faith, and that my body is an instrument of consciousness that is so much more profound than this culture realizes. So I think it's starting to recognize, and I think your body also makes the emptiness have boundary, right? So that inward emptiness and the silence that William's talking about, and we all have, it actually puts boundary around what we carry, right? And so I think for a lot of reasons, as you think about whatever mind body practice you might decide to go, or modality you want to encounter, like follow forward with in the audience, I don't really care which one it is. I want you to get the miraculous beauty of having a body and being able to house life force. It's stunning. So there is some contemplation to trying to figure out how beautiful this thing is, right? So
I think we have to remember also that most of the world does not have access to the kind of dialogue that we're actually speaking about. Most of the world does not have the technology, the skill set. We have to remember a lot of people still don't have clean water or sufficient food or access to even very basic healthcare. So I think different times and different situations really require different modes of sustainability and self-care. The first thing that occurred in my mind was looking for absolute solutions, that we really fight for having this one answer. So I don't think there is one answer actually here. But some of the basic things that I learned in the monastery was looking after other people, generosity, kindness. Some of the most basic human things are actually the things, ironically, which sustain us in the long run. You probably know this, that when you're really stressed and you really have too much, that it usually just takes a toast burning to actually hit someone. You probably had one of those moments. But in the same regard, that when someone, when you're having a really tough time and just someone shows you a little bit of genuine kindness, it can really go a long way. And sometimes people really forget the act of just cooking for someone or calling someone or just checking up on them. Are you okay? Do you know? So I think for me, what counts the most is someone who genuinely shows real signs of love, affection, and kindness. Those very basic human qualities that can really be lost in how much we think we should know or develop or sound like. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. Thank you everyone for your participation. And I think what I'll just share is kind of echoing off of everything that Jamie, Matthew, and William shared, in the sense of deepened self-awareness, right? Which happens when we connect to nature, which happens when we, recognize that there's like a universal way in which there's universal cosmic kind of operations in the universe that are in force, that have these truths that come to us through nature, right? When we study, like, just look at mushrooms or look at plants and trees and just ask ourselves questions about them. And I think that deepened self-awareness combined with, what I mentioned earlier around like ancestry tracing and ancestral lineage tracing around, how can we heal in our present body the trauma of our ancestors and come to reality, or come to an honest kind of reflection of, like, our ancestors as victims, but maybe also perpetrators of harm, and really just find some sort of reconciliation And I think that deepened self-awareness with the ancestral tracing allows us to really be honest about, you know, how it is that we want to show up in ourselves, in relationship to ourselves, around like healing our own body and traumas, in relationship to each other, and in relationship to our communities, because I think some of the most important work we can be doing right now is going to be informed by, you know, relationships within our communities and how it is that we are working with our communities to make these practices accessible. And there's a real freedom in feeling connected to community, especially in these times, right? Where we can, you know, someone mentioned it, cook a meal for someone, right? And share it with your neighbor, or share it with, you know, communities who are in America. I know like there's like people are really close to being evicted or behind on, you know, payments for rent. And that's a real reality. And William pointed out, you know, there's a different level of sustainability and access around the world right now. And that's a really tough truth to sit with. And our mindfulness practices, our embodied practices aren't going to resolve that, but it will allow us to come into a higher acceptance of that truth if we push ourselves to not use them to spiritually bypass, but to actually sit with, you know, what are the spiritual realities and what are also the material conditions that are allowing this poverty, this inequality, this violence to keep occurring over and over again. And how do I want to show up in my awareness and my awakening?
Thank you so much for all of your perspectives. I see there's a lot of gratitude in the chat as well for all your voices, your messages, for being different yet complementary to each other. I would like to say to all of the people watching this right now that all of our wonderful panelists today are going to be part of the Embodiment Conference, which I'm going to post a few links in the chat right now. I've already posted them under the Facebook post in the Tech Trauma and Social Change channel group. So here they are. If you would like to watch more presentations by these wonderful speakers, then you can head over to the embodimentconference.org, and their presentations will take place during the conference, middle to the end of October. And I've put in a link to an upgrade up until the end of today. There's an opportunity to get a really good deal on, on all of the recordings afterwards, and it's curated lists and all stuff like that. There's going to be one more inclusion and accessibility panel in, I think it's 4 hours time. Yeah, so there's a link to that, and you can see the time in your own time zone. And links to all of our speakers here. Did I get them right, or is there something that needs correction? You were raising your hand, William.
I'm just wondering if we're going to meet, if there'll be a time when we meet again like this, because I found this very useful. Also having these dialogues.
Yeah, there will be panel discussions, and yeah, I would love you to be part of them. So if you would like to learn more about the work of the speakers today, you can head over to their websites and learn more about what they do. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us today. Yeah,
I did just, my website has just been updated. So I think I put it in there, thecenteredway.com. thecenteredway.com. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, go to mindbodysolutions.org, which is a nonprofit rather than just my name. Yeah.
So I am the Mindfulness Network for People of Color, so it's mnpc.co.uk.
Okay. Well, I felt really good in this panel, you guys. You guys said some really wonderful things. So
amazing, yeah. I wish we could talk all
work.
day. It was
yeah,
amazing.
good
Thank
work.
you for your beautiful
and that's part of the problem. People need to start talking. So
thanks everybody for being here. It was really
everyone in the audience too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being in the space. Yes, and we hope to see all of you at the Embodiment Conference, both speakers and viewers. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you soon.
So, thank you.